The film begins in a stranded desert where a spacecraft has been crushed on a volatile, oval-shaped planet. On the scene, we meet the pilot, John. He struggles to stand upright, as the place's force field is magnificent. He somehow manages to regain consciousness and strength, but in the meantime, we catch a glimpse of how time works on the planet. His clock keeps fast-forwarding, and John rushes to check on his fellow passenger, Mac. Mac is his pet, and this unfortunate event has made him a victim too. The pilot grabs his pet and quickly finds a jackpot that was able to take them to a more stable location. In the next scene, back on Earth, we see John's mom leaving a voicemail for him, expressing her condolences for his loss. She keeps telling him to keep going in life regardless of the tragic events that happen, and she emphasizes staying sober. It is now revealed that John is an alcoholic, and his addiction has been triggered by the loss of his girlfriend, whom he was very close to. His mom ends the call after telling him how much she loves him and to take care of his mission. The following scene takes us to space to see what John was going through before the ship collapsed into a strange planet. He was listening to heavy rock music and was drinking too much. Since he is in space, we see some condolence letters and cards that have been meant for him. All of them express condolences for the loss of his girlfriend, and we get to understand why John's smoking and drinking have been triggered. He is now completely drunk and out of control as he swerves through space between meteors. The pilot is accompanied by Mac, and shortly, he glimpses pictures of him and his girl, Emma. He loses focus as he is staring at the photo, and suddenly, the ship goes off course. He tries to change the trajectory, but sadly, the ship crashes into the strange planet. William and Mac have landed in a snowy forest and are now sliding through the forest due to a loss of balance. They crash into a tree, and they finally get some stable air. John collects himself and takes Mac by the arm to contemplate their next move. He attempts to communicate with the base, but is unsuccessful in giving useful information, except telling them he is going to look for some power source on the planet. He decides to find a refuge anyway, and he walks throughout the forest and arrives in the desert. At night, John makes a fire with the dry grass, and Mac finds solace for the day. And John wants to take a sip of his alcohol. However, there wasn't much in it, and he feels sad again. He keeps reminding himself of the grief and guilt he has for the loss of Emma. Here we catch some flashbacks of days before his departure from Earth. He was with Emma, and they were enjoying an evening on the beach. We can see the two couldn't get enough of one another and the love in their eyes. Mac is also there, playing with his guardians. However, their mood suddenly halts when Emma tears up to not let go. He promises to return, but Emma doesn't like his departure being decided. In the present, he slides comfortably on the ground, and he starts to talk to Mac. Mac doesn't respond, of course, but will explain. Unlike Earth, which is circular with a fixed axis and consistent mass, they are on an ellipse-shaped planet. This means that due to the shape, John and Mac will experience different kinds of weather patterns and gravity, and most importantly, they could forget about what they know about time since time goes fast compared to time on Earth. However, he will also mention a myth he once heard about this planet, claiming it contains the fountain of youth. When John checks Mac's chins, he spots some gray hair, so he assumes the myth is not so much of a truth. Before going to sleep, we also see John writing some notes in his tiny notebook. The next morning, John is awakened by the bright sunshine over his head. He wakes up and checks his alcohol bottle. He got some drops out of it to start the day and continued his journey with Mac. On their way, they will reveal that the crush could have taken almost 6 years of their lives. This would affect John as much as it affects Mac, because for the dog, it's damn near half his lifespan. John pets Mac on the head anyway, and the two hike all day long to possibly find a power source. They walk all day long through the irresistible desert and land of the strange planet. They finally came across a lake in the forest, and this time it will decide for them to catch their breath. He swims in the lake, and Mac also paddles in the water. While they are about to leave, John takes some water from there and puts it in his alcohol bottle. As they continue to walk, they will stop to take a piss, and Mac gets confused by the flow of urine. Gravity here is funny, and will scoff off the event, and she just wants to be safe. They quickly depart from there, and across, they find a fountain. The view is breathtaking, but soon enough, the water halts its custom flow style and starts to flow upwards. Now everything is getting reversed, and he managed to feel the droplets of water on his face, making him feel reborn. That night, the two lost souls camp beside the fire and will get flashbacks from his last memory. He was on the ship, and everything was going normally. He has just bid farewell to Emma. He was soon contacted from the base, and the bad news was broken down to him. This is what led to all the events that followed and placed Will on this deserted planet. Before going to sleep, we see John writing his notes once again. The next day, he resumes his hike to look for some helpful power sources. Mac is, of course, alongside him. Several miles later, John comes across a tree full of special fruits, and he stops to check them out. He realizes they are more than fruit, and claims he just needs 12 volts and 16 amps to recharge his ship battery. But of course, he is going to need them in large amounts, so he and Mac settle down just there to collect some more. He also eats some fruits and enjoys his thrust for taste. However, he fails to succeed at first in using the fruits as batteries, so he decides to try again the next day. The following morning, he uses his technical skills to build a non-conducting basket for the fruits and some ropes to climb on trees to grab them. Mac will be helping him catch them as they fall, and the two successfully complete the harvest. However, we also get to see the ropes tied to the tree loosen up and become somewhat prone to being cut off. He is okay for now, and he collects them together in his basket. He cut the wires from his jackpot piece by piece and placed them inside the fruits. The wires are copper, so after all, the idea is to recharge the engine of the craft with this. He completes the whole connecting process, and now he is headed to the place where they initially crashed. The spacecraft is still surrounded by the planet's force field, and John knows the energy will be a challenge for him to get close to the ship. Therefore, he doesn't want to risk Mac's life. He ties Mac further away from the ship before he departs. Mac keeps growling and pleading, but his voices are unanswered. John arrives at the ship and begins to struggle to approach. However, on his way, the fruits start to melt and spill due to the extreme weather, and he loses all of them by the time he gets there. John is now exhausted and tired, but he doesn't lose hope. He continues to march towards the force field, even without the batteries. He wants to take something out of the ship before returning to the forest, but he struggles against the force field. Mac sees this and can't stand his buddy's struggle. He bites the ropes off his neck and bravely heads to rescue John. Meanwhile, John is trying to get his essentials from the ship, and he sees Mac running. He forbids him to approach, but karma is a real thing, which led his voice to go unanswered this time. However, John managed to grab what he needed on time, and he quickly rushed to return to Mac. They meet halfway, and Mac confides in his guardian. John is a bit emotional for a minute, thinking he will lose Mac to the force field, but Mac just wants to protect him. That night, John tries to record some of today's events and discuss how life is impossible on an ellipse. The next morning, the two head back to the trees so that John can harvest the fruits again. He hops on the fruitful tree. However, this time, the ropes get cut off as he is hanging on them. He fell down on a sharp piece of wood, which resulted in severe pain in his body. He gets irritated after that and is hopeless about the situation. His anger has been triggered to the point where he is now shouting and screaming at Mac for no reason. Mac gets scoffed off and is ordered to set off. He complies with John's order and now looks at him from a distance. John continues to attempt to collect the fruits by throwing thick sticks at them. He continues to do so until he gets enough. Then he connects them with the wires he brought from the ship. After he completes it, he realizes he has lost Mac in the field. Mac didn't come, even after a while, so he went out to look for him. Of course, Mac is too far away by now and can't be found anywhere. Elsewhere, Mac hears John scream out his name, so he begins to return to the spaceship to meet him up, and John spends the night alone. He sits by the fire, but by now, he believes Mac is lost forever. He takes out his notebook as always, but his tiny pencil gets broken. This triggers his last patience and control, and he loses his temper. He throws the note into the fire and watches it burn. He sleeps there, right next to it. Midnight, he sees this nightmare where Emma cries beside him, asking for his whereabouts and begging for him to hold her hand and be with her. Her tone changes from pleading to anger, and she approaches to slap him. This wakes him up in reality, but the guild still sits over him. John smashes the ground in anger, and soon he walks towards the ship to get some alcohol. His addictions are now helplessly triggered, and for the next couple of scenes, we witness John chugging hard alcohol without a second thought. Meanwhile, he gets flashbacks of his memory on Earth. It is now that we will learn how he heard about the demise of Emmy from the doctor. This keeps him depressed enough to keep drinking regardless of the severe force field. He is now a drunkhead and can't even balance himself. He falls down through a cliff, and this causes him to slip down and hit his head with a huge rock. He is now unconscious, and we watch how he was left alone without anybody coming for his rescue. A while later, we see John getting pulled into something, and it seems this is his rescue. Thankfully, Mac manages to arrive here on time and pull John with the ropes that are attached to him. John wakes up shortly, But when he sees Mac, he has fallen weak due to the force field finishing the rest of his lifespan. It is known that by now, a complete 12 years have passed for him, and he is now lifeless. John holds on, grieves over him, and blames the alcohol for all of this. He drops the bottle in regret, but as he sits there with the flashbacks of Mac's memory with him on Earth, he tears up in a very innocent plea. But just then, a memory sparks in him of when he once told Mac about the myth of the Fountain of Youth in Ellipse. He remembers the fountain they came across back then, and decides to take Mac there to save his life. John quickly runs back into the forest to get the battery he managed to restart. He grabs it after checking if it's still working, then heads back to Mac. He carries Mac, and then puts the batteries back into the craft. Initially, the ship was unresponsive, but it worked after John slapped the dashboard a few times. The lights and all the systems on the craft start to appear on his screen, and John takes a leap of faith once more. They flew over the fountain, but John noticed how Mac was unresponsive. He grieves over his lifeless body, but when the scene cuts and transitions to 15 years later, we understand that John and Mac consumed the water from the fountain that day. Now 15 years later, another life cycle has begun and ended for Mac. The movie comes to a close as we see John living an addiction-free life that once cost him the lives of his beloved pets. He says he never talked about what happened on that planet, but he continues to be mesmerized by the changes and hopes it brought for him. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.